the issues that we're dealing with are very, what you would call global issues of orthodoxy. What you're dealing with are the big questions, which usually is not really the educational model or the mindset of the Torah mind. You know, it's very interesting. Shimshon Hirsch wanted to write two Sfarim. He wanted to write Choreb and he wanted to write Moriah. Okay, which are two names for Harsina. Anyways, the fact is the Sefer he did write was Choreb. And Choreb is a micro-analysis of mitzvot. So in Choreb, he breaks down all the mitzvot and learns through every one of the mitzvot. The other Sefer he wanted to write was called Moriah, and it was a much more macro presentation on Torah from a bigger perspective. And he never got to write it. The truth is that's very much the reality of what happens in the Torah world. We are very, very focused on details and micro. How do you learn Chumash? Right? You learn pasuk by pasuk, Rashi, read the pasuk, read Rashi, and so forth and so forth. When I first taught my first Chumash class in a high school, what I did is I made the class read a whole section of Chumash without Meforshim. I think from a sasam to a sasam, from a samach to a samach. I gave them read these collection of psuvah or a parsha or something like that. Like I made them read the whole thing. I said, I want you to see the bigger perspective. Okay, now that you see the bigger perspective, now you can look at the pratim of the psukim. You read the whole story. Now you can see how everything comes together. So the fact is that remember this class? They were a good class, but they had a really hard time. Their first test that I gave them, and I was teaching a class where they separated this. I think it actually was a grade 9 class, and they had two grade 9s, like the better grade 9 and the less
higher share and lower share.
Higher share and lower share, I think. And these were guys who were all kept pulling A's in the Limudei Kodesh and stuff like that. And here they are with me. I think the highest mark in the class was an 84, and after that it dropped right into lower grades, and they were really, really upset. By the end of the year, they were doing much better. But the fact is, they never saw the big picture. And that's something that exists within much of Torah study. We don't ever present the big picture. And because of that, we are so focused on pratim and details that we don't really understand what's really going on here. And this, I think, is a problem that exists within our world these days. You have a lot of fragmentation within the Orthodox world. Like you have this whole group called Open Orthodoxy, which is at the left fringe of the Orthodox world, and the Aguda has basically declared that Open Orthodoxy is not Orthodox, and there's a lot of arguments against it, and so forth and so forth. I'm not going to say that everyone in Open Orthodoxy is not Orthodox, but there are shilas on certain aspects of the group. But the point is that every argument becomes an argument in a prat. You're not looking at the bigger picture and understanding the bigger picture. And we don't think in terms of the big question. And now the pratim do make up the pratim of the big question, but you know how they say the the sum is bigger than the I mean, the whole is usually bigger than the sum of its parts. But the fact is we don't really understand that, and that extent. Like for example, what's going on now with a lot of these issues, but we have no way. Like, let me take another issue. Like, for example, the relationship between the branches of Judaism. Okay, between Orthodoxy, Conservative, Reform, so forth and so forth. Fact is everyone knows pratim. Right? This is halachic problem here, it's halachic problem there, and so forth and so forth. But what's occurring, and I know why I'm thinking about this. There was an article someone sent me over the web about new statements about modern Orthodoxy, and one of the statements this guy said is something that modern Orthodoxy believes, that the secular Zionism, something to the extent that secular Zionism and religious Zionism are both acceptable forms of Zionism. And what that really was saying is that modern Orthodoxy accepts secular Zionism, right? And the argument for that is that the Mizrahi did join with the World Zionist Organization when the Aguda didn't, and Mizrahi was willing to work with the general Zionistic world, and we respect and the modern Orthodox world respects the Zionist, the general Zionist trend.
Depends on what you define as Zionism.
Well, what you're talking about right now is I'm going back to just Chilonim, just the idea of secular Zionism. So the fact is that the attitude would be, and there's this perception that Rav Kook said the Chilonim Rav Kook said the Chilonim were driven by a good aspect of the Neshama in terms of their feelings of Zionism and so forth. But the fact is that it leads to a problem, in a sense that you start accepting, it's like the leaders of secular Zionism become a perception of them being Jewish models. Now, this leads to an issue, and I don't like dealing with any personality in particular, and because I don't like judging anyone. So if you ask me who's a tzaddik, no, that's the Kodesh Baruch Hu can judge. You judge. You have to judge the behavior in terms of knowing what to do.
So how do you set a standard?
But the fact is, you can set a standard in terms of behavior. The fact is how Kodesh Baruch Hu looked at Theodore Herzl or David Ben Gurion. That's Kodesh Baruch Hu's business. Okay, the fact of the matter is, I can look at David Ben Gurion and said he did a lot to build up the state of Israel. Okay, he also wasn't from. Okay. The fact is I can look at behavior and say things like that. But the fact is that from a broader perspective, when you're looking at Jewishness, you ask this question: what is Jewishness? So is Jewishness more tied to Jewish nationalism and building up Zionism, or is it more tied to the commitment to a Kodesh Baruch Hu? So I remember getting some people very upset when I made this statement, that to the extent that from a Orthodox Jewish perspective, if you are Tzioni and you have modern Orthodox viewpoints, you can think very positively about David Ben Gurion in terms of his behavior towards the state and so forth and so forth. And you can have a strong disagreement with the Satmar Rav's view of the state of Israel. However, in terms of a macro perspective of Jewishness and what Jewishness is about, you clearly have to understand that the Satmar Rav's view of Jewishness is closer to what Jewishness is about from your perspective. Okay, so that if you're trying to define what Jewishness is about, the Satmar Rav's connection to Jewishness even though he did not have a connection to Zionism or to political Zionism, is more in line with your perspective of Jewishness from an Orthodox perspective than David Ben-Gurion's. Even though your perception of the behavior of David Ben-Gurion could be somewhat positive because you personally hold that there's a role for Zionism, but in terms of your definition of the greater perspective of Jewishness, you have to understand the Chaburah is more in line with that perspective, even though you may fully disagree with his attitude towards political Zionism.
Right.
That leads to a much different understanding of the macro perspective. And
that people focus on specifics.
Right, and the fact is that's something that we don't deal with. We really don't deal with it. We deal with a lot of micro issues.
Finding commonality in the macro, or just
we have certain micro issues which we feel closer to and have a connection to people also feel closer to those micro issues without stepping back and understanding, okay, what's the big picture? Okay? In other words, what really is the big picture? And where does the big picture begin? Okay, is the big picture of Jewishness Jewish nationalism, or is the big picture of Jewishness the fact that our nation was created to be the Mamlechas Kohanim and Goy Kodesh? Now, in terms of Pratim, you can sit there and say, listen, there is a group over here that believes that we're supposed to be Mamlechas Kohanim and Goy Kodesh, and every way that they want to do it, you have problems with. Okay? And there's another group that does not believe that we're Mamlechas Kohanim and Goy Kodesh, right? But their behavior is more in line in Pratim with everything we want to do. And the point is that you have to begin to understand that. Okay? I'll tell you a case. I was once speaking in Boston, and I talked about the concept of Elu ve'elu, knowing, respecting people who you disagree with, but at the same point in time, as Elu ve'elu and respecting the people you disagree with, you have to know where the lines have to be drawn in terms of positions or viewpoints that are totally outside the pale. Okay? So it gave an extensive share about within the pale, within Orthodoxy, and accepting variant opinions within Orthodoxy, but at the same point in time, knowing what's outside of Orthodoxy and understanding that those positions are outside of Orthodoxy, even though in terms of Pratim, that may be closer to what your position is and so forth. I remember after I spoke, a woman came over to me and she was really, really upset. She said, and she was specifically focusing on women in Judaism. And she said, so you're telling us that she was upset, and she said, those people who, her language, try to keep women down or try to limit the involvement of women in Jewish expression and so forth and so forth. You're saying we have to respect them because of Elu ve'elu. Okay? Yet, conservative Judaism, which is much more, and their egalitarianism, which would is outside, halach should be outside the pale, you're saying that we have to be more, that still is outside the pale. She was very upset. She was saying, no, we should be more understanding of this group and that group. I said, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Because I basically pointed out that, yes, that those groups, which you are vehemently against in terms of their attitude towards women, right, they might still be within the pale of Orthodoxy, while other groups which may share your attitude towards women, they are not within the...
Their focus was on women issues.
Because this woman's focus was women issues.
Right.
And the point is that that's because there was the aspect is to understand what is the starting point of Jewishness. Okay, the starting point of Jewishness is not women's issues. The starting point of Jewishness is commitment to Torah and the acceptance of halacha. And then you work from there. Now, at the same point in time, it's a struggle and so forth. You understand a lot more where these people are coming from in certain ways and so forth. But the fact is you have to understand how you build up the group.
Right.
In other words, what you're really doing is you're saying, listen, we want to have a broad group, which means that we want to have a pluralistic group in the sense of people having variant opinions, but to be part of the group, we have to have variant opinions with something that is at the center. So the variant opinions of a halachic Jew has to be based upon the center of Torah Sinai. Okay? And that means that you have to have some level of acceptance of variance around this center. Which means that there will be people from another group who you may overlap with more in terms of certain details, but at the core,
Right.
in terms of the definition of the group, their core is not the same as your core.
So the micro matters, though. So you were saying like focus on the macro, but the micro.
The micro clearly matters. The fact is the micro clearly matters. That's halacha.
Right.
Halacha clearly matters. And there's disagreements of opinions and so forth and so forth. But the point is we lose sight of the macro. We lose sight of the big picture so often. And this comes out in so many issues.
Well, is it also that we... No, you're right. I was going to say we focus on different micros.
We do focus on different micros, but the fact is, and in certain ways, we may join forces with people from other groupings because we share the same macro concern in that one area.
Right.
Okay? And that's legitimate. Okay? I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to say if it's outside of Orthodoxy, it has nothing to do with Jewish groups who are pro-Israel, who happen not to be Orthodox. Of course we relate to Jewish groups who outside of Orthodoxy that are pro-Israel. If we're pro-Israel, however, we have to understand that the first definition that is our focus is the commitment to Torah.
Right.
So on a certain level, I'm not going to relate to Naturi Karta in terms of how they relate to Israel. Okay? Okay, Naturi Karta is obviously an extreme case.
No,
but
what people are doing is with Israel groups, they're joining with Christians, they're joining with Muslims, they're joining
but the fact is, we have to understand. But you have to understand what the definition is, and what's the macro definition, your starting point. Now the fact is a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't get that broader perspective of understanding what's at their core and how it develops out from there.
Is that more common with Orthodox Jews versus non? So we have a standard?
No, I think the fact of the matter is people do have a standard. You're assuming that we are the only ones having a standard. They have a standard. It's a standard you may not be as easily may not be as easily defined. Okay, but most people have a standard that they work from. Okay, but the point is it's not usually defined, and a lot of people, even when they have the standard both within the Orthodox world and outside, don't really have their definition or have not really analyzed the standard to see what it's really about. So it's all part of the working to get the standard. Mm-hmm. The point is that I'm not trying to move away from they say this is the right way, this is the wrong way, something like that. What I'm trying to say though is that people have to do self-analysis of what they stand for. Okay, and a lot of times when people do self-analysis of what they stand for, they can uncover weaknesses in their perspectives. The reason I go back to Zionism and so forth is because in not just simply Zionism. The fact is that it's a good example of where you know, Rav Kook had his position towards secular Zionism. Shimshon Hirsch had a completely opposite position. But Shimshon Hirsch and Rav Kook both shared the same core perception. And then it got out to Pratim. But then as you get out into these Pratim, people lose sight of the fact that they're creating new definitions of their groupings based upon a Prat, upon this detail, without really going back to the core. And I guess our whole discussion tonight was really around this, in the sense that we have so many issues in our world today. We have issues around women in Judaism. We have issues between the branches of Judaism. We have issues with gays. We have issues with transgender stuff like that whole issue.
Isn't like a point?
What?
Isn't it the point to have those issues so you find a way?
So
the whole point of Torah is to try to figure out how to make it all work.
Well, the point of Torah is how to make it all work within some centered position, and it's not going to make it.
Halacha is basically like finding solution to.
Yeah, but what
all
is
these things?
Yeah, but what is the solution? And that solution is not going to be. The fact is that solution may not be a solution that everyone's happy with.
Well, that's the fact. It's the law, but that's how the law works.
Right.
Just because.
But the halacha. But the thing about the halacha is that there is a pluralistic understanding of the halacha. In other words, the halacha is not monolithic.
No.
The halacha has a variance of opinions, and it says this variance of opinions works within the system. That one is outside, or that one is outside. But the point is because of that, you can offer this variance of possibilities, and that then other people can sort of like join with these variances and think that this variance now becomes the core that really connects them to another grouping. See, the thing I was trying to say was, like for example, when they ordained the first Maharat, okay, they were arguing what the title should be and so forth and so forth. And I read somewhere that there was a female Reformed rabbi who was involved in that discussion, and she said something to the fact that it's nice to see the Orthodox now getting into more women's rights and so forth and so forth. And what gets me is that within Orthodoxy, even if you were at the extreme of women's rights and developing women's rights and so forth, the fact is a female Reform rabbi had no place being involved in that discussion. Okay? In fact, it should have been adamant that she's not involved in that discussion. Why? Because our connection is much more to orthodoxy, right, than to women's rights. Okay? So the point is that the people involved in the room, even though they take on this position of women's rights, should have made a very strong position, but still, I am in the group with people who take strong anti-women positions from the Orthodox perspective, than in the group with Reformed female rabbis. And that's something that people didn't understand. It's okay, like I said beforehand, more connected to the Chaburah than David Ben Gurion. Okay, we're more, and the fact is that comes from understanding your core point and where the macro standard comes from.
So how do we do that?
By understanding the core points and what the originating standard is from, and then what variance you get and why there's variance. Yeah.
But isn't it the Torah, the Orthodox, whatever? It's always have been supporting women. It's just a matter of maybe in Orthodox circles it wasn't much maybe applied. But
what?
It's just okay. What bothers me here is that people who have no in-depth knowledge about a subject would assume that in Orthodox circle women are somewhat less of importance than they are, let's say, who are like than more in modern circle. And that is not the case. It's just that, I mean, if you look, even if you look at Torah itself, at the Tanakh, it's very supportive of women's rights. The women were the first people to own land before they entered Eretz Yisrael. That's unheard of, like thousands years ago.
What do you mean the women were first?
I mean, when we read in the Torah, when there was men who did not have sons, and it was decreed that these women should inherit a land among with men.
Yes.
And we were talking about thousands years ago when people didn't even have basic rights. That in itself is a big indicator that Torah always been supportive of women. It's just, what I'm saying is the perspective. The argument is, like, I'm not sure. The argument is only men got the land. Only men got the land. And that's why one of the arguments why women aren't mechuyev in Birkas Hamazon, why women aren't obligated to say Birkas Hamazon is Doraisa. Okay, they are obligated midrabanan, but there's a question if they're obligated midoraisa. One of the arguments is because in the Birkas Hamazon we refer to the reception of the land that we received. Women did not receive any portion of Eretz Yisrael. Period. Now, the case you're stating is that Slavchad, right, was of the generation that did get a portion of the land. Now, before the land was actually divvied out, Slavchad died, leaving no men as inheritors, because inheritance only go to men first. If you have 4 men and 1 woman, okay, the way it works is the woman gets a certain thing, but not some inheritance. She gets enough to survive or whatever, but inheritance basically, she's single, she gets that, but the fact is, otherwise she's
children or something.
Anyways, but the point is that inheritance only goes to men. Okay, so if there's 4 men and 4 sons and 1 daughter, the inheritance is split up 4 ways between the men. Okay, without dealing with the fact that there's a certain thing, a certain livelihood, a certain thing for which is first for the woman that she gets, for her sustenance. So the point is that would seem very sexist to people. Slavchad, what happened was the Slavchad left without any sons. So the Benos Slavchad tiny to Moshe, because there's no sons, right? Our father should still get his portion, and it should come to us as his daughters. Okay, that was the one exception. Mm-hmm. But it was not that it did give women rights, but it gave rights in a certain way.
It sort of opened up a new window.
Right.
What I'm trying to say is that it all comes down to a perspective.
Yes.
People have perspective that in Orthodox world women are treated as less, but that's not the case.
The fact is though is that most people would say yes, women. The truth is that the halacha has various different things to protect the rights of women and so forth and so forth.
Exactly.
And the fact is that people looking at orthodoxy would perceive orthodoxy as being somewhat no, most people perceive orthodoxy. The truth is that compared to the rest of the world, women was progressive. But the truth of the matter is that in the time of Muhammad, Islam was considered to be progressive.
What?
Okay, so the fact is that one of the great things they said about Muhammad is he was progressive in terms of the advancement of women's rights. So the point is you have to understand the perspective and so forth. The point is I'm not trying to define orthodoxy based upon our standards of equality. People today attack orthodoxy, for example, in terms of the aguna situation. Says, well, why can't the woman just initiate the divorce? Halachically, she can't. I'm not here to defend halacha. The point is that there's a distinction between men and women in halacha, and in many ways, people from a more modern perspective, and I use that term in terms of our world today, would sit there and say that the law is not totally equal and egalitarian, and that's correct. There are certain ways where women don't have the same rights as men.
Women cannot initiate divorce?
No.
In no circumstances?
In halacha?
Yeah.
You can't give a get.
Oh, but can they initiate it?
Can they go to Bezdin and say yes? Yes, they can go to Bezdin and say they want.
That's already.
They can go to Bezdin and say they want a divorce, and the fact of the matter is Bezdin then has to make the decision. There are cases where a Bezdin can force a husband to give divorce. There's other cases but the truth is the halacha, the man. I mean, if you look at the Doraisa, if you look at the biblical definition of divorce, right? Okay, a man could divorce his wife against her will. Okay,
but that should be grounds, no? He cannot just divorce against her will because he feels like it.
Doraisa you can.
Yeah, just for no reason at all.
I mean that's the question based Hillel, based Shammai, whatever it is. But yes,
he doesn't say like dude, there has people involved in the process. Like it's not like so simple that okay, I just feel like divorcing, yes, so here.
Here's a get.
Here's the get. Yeah, like he has to go through a process.
Baby.
Okay.
It's not so clear cut. That's what I'm saying.
Doraisa? Talking about the actual biblical law?
Yes, I want to know.
Yeah. Husband can divorce his wife against her will. Now, the truth is that's why the ksuba, and the question is ksuba is doraisa or not, but the point of the matter is if you divorce your wife against your will, you got to pay the ksuba. So that usually kept the husband a little bit more think about it twice, because the ksuba was, the ksuba was a good amount of money. Yeah. People don't recognize the ksuba.
Again, it protects the right of a woman. Like,
yes, it does. But the fact
it's an incredible thing. It's like a prenup, It is. It's like a prenup.
But the fact is that, it's so. We're. I'm not trying to. There's a concept in I guess we learned it from Rabbi Ravinu. When Rabbi Ravinu said, "Shofet kol haaretz lo yaseh mishpat," the judge of the world not do justice. What Avram was really saying is, I have to understand your justice. Okay? So if I don't understand, we have a problem. So if we run into halachas that we don't understand, we have to try and figure it out. It doesn't mean we're always going to understand the final halacha, but there is a process of trying to understand it, and there's also a process of some movement in halacha, in the sense that
the rabbis over the years did develop greater rights for women, and so forth and so forth and so forth. But the fact is that as you work out this movement or this development, there always has to be the recognition of the starting point. The starting point is a position that, let's say, the way the Reform would like to say the starting point is that Jews thought like the way people thought in the ancient world, and therefore we progressed, and therefore the whole term is progression. From a Torah perspective, the starting point was the Sinus Torah, and that means that even at the starting point, you can't just sit there and say God gave laws that weren't so good because that's the way the world was at that point in time, but you have to move on from there. See, the issue is that in those laws, which our modern world will not perceive to be so great, there's also must be lessons in it and ideas in it. So, so that's why when you make the statement, like in terms of looking back in ancient times and say we've progressed beyond that, it's good. But the fact is, there is that argument of progression. There is a problem, to grow in Torah and develop it and so forth and so forth. There's a perception that we're working towards the ultimate idea. But at the other point in time, there's also a perception that you have to recognize that you can't turn the original Torah law of the Doraisa, of the actual biblical law, you can't turn it into the law of of ancient times where the people were not developed, or the people were recruited. I mean, this is I'll give you an example of this in terms of sacrifices. So the Rambam says in the Moreh Nevuchim that sacrifices was, even Torah sacrifices, was giving in to the way the world was in terms of people's sacrifices. But use sacrifices to relate to their deities. So people thought sacrifices were something spiritual and so forth and so forth. So the Torah could not just say no more sacrifices, because that's the way people thought in terms of doing their spiritual thing. But the way the Torah introduced sacrifices was in such a manner eventually to weed people away from it. So he said that's why sacrifices are only based midrash and stuff like that. Okay, and eventually, eventually over time, tefillah took over from sacrifices, and now in the Gullus we got tefillah and so forth and so forth. The problem is the Rambam says what?
We're chiyav in certain
tefillahs, right? Okay.
No, not tefillahs. We're chayav in korbanos, aren't we?
Right. So the fact is, the Rambam still says with Bias Mashiach we'll have korbanos. Okay? So how do you reconcile the Rambam in the Yad where he says with the coming of the Mashiach we'll have korbanos with his attitude in the Moreh Nevuchim? A lot of people have problems with that. Because by him saying with the coming of Mashiach we'll return to korbanos, he's saying korbanos has absolute value. In the Moreh Nevuchim he says korbanos was sort of only like God permitted it for the time being, but eventually we'll wane our way against it. But the truth is, almost everyone else yells at the Rambam for that statement. The Ramban, the Ramban in Chumash, is very upset with the Rambam statement. You know, how could you say this about korbanos? Korbanos must have it's a chiyuv d'oraisa, her obligations to be makav korbans. So how can you deal with it? And the fact is people ask you that today all the time. I get questions. How can we think about going back to sacrifices with the Bias Mashiach? And my answer is that usually, listen, when I understand sacrifices, I'll answer the question. Right now, I agree with you. I have problems with the idea of return to sacrificial order. Hopefully, with the Bias Mashiach, if it does have a return to sacrificial order, which is what the Rambam says, I'll understand it.
But isn't there also an idea
but at that point in time, you still have to deal with the original starting statement. The Reform movement can discuss is that's the way they thought back there. Now we're more advanced. So they treated women negatively back there. Well, we're more advanced. But the fact is, the halacha included separation of the sexes, and included not giving the same rights to women as it gave to men.
Right.
So the point is how do we understand it? That's a halachic question, or a hashkafic question. The truth is that because of the nature of Torah and halacha and hashkafa, we have dealt with the issues of that struggle, okay? And that's part of the issue with women in Judaism. There's an egalitarian aspect to it, but there also is a distinction in the sexes, which is very, very real from a halakhic perspective. So the point is, but for sure, we can't just deny, we can't just throw it away as that's the way it was in the older days. Okay? Okay? The fact is, and movement has to be explained.
So what do people say about Rambam? What did he actually mean?
People have that problem. It's a question. We're not sure. He said this in the morning, he said that in the yad. And the fact of the matter is, he said in the Morah, here's the idea of sacrifices was existing. He doesn't say in the Morah that there won't be sacrifices with Mashiach, but his whole explanation is sacrifices, that God only allowed sacrifices because of the way people thought.
Well, isn't also the problem that we have in our society is people don't, their values, or is it unfair?
That's all movement.
Is it unfair to say
no,
that?
that's part of it, but the fact is,
their values are just messed up.
No, the point is that that's the whole issue. The whole issue is that what you're really doing is creating a dynamic system. Maybe we'll take from here next week. You're really talking about dynamic system, and the fact is that that dynamic system does imply that there's some movement forward with respect for the past. Well, and therefore how you balance the two.
That goes according, I guess, to what my dad was talking about earlier, where he was saying that you have, you should daven and you should go to the mikvah and do shmiras and people learn Kabbalah. So it's the same thing with like what korbanos actually meant. I mean, this is obviously wrong. I can't argue with it.
No. The fact is that that's why once you get, you see, this is a good example. Once you get involved in the details, you're not seeing the greater picture here. See, the point is the greater picture here is, this is what we're really getting at, is that on one hand we have issues with past values, on the other hand we have to have respect for past values. So we're in conflict.
Right.
You can't move forward in values unless you believe that there were problems with previous values.
Right.
But on the other hand, okay, there is a concept of having issues with previous values. And that's where we'll go on next time.